Hi everyone, we're going to continue in Chapter 3, Physiology and Histology of the Skin. We're in Section 3-4, that's explain the function of each layer of the skin from the deepest to the surface. So the skin comprises three main components, and that is the hypodermis or the subcutaneous layer, the dermis, and then the epidermis. And we're going to start with the deepest layer and work our way to the surface. In your textbook, there is a photo of the skin, and you can see those different layers in the textbook. Also, there's a little activity that you need to do. It's make a three-dimensional model of the skin. You want to be creative. Your model must identify all the layers as well as their functions. If you can't get supplies for that, at least draw a photo and then send it to me, either my email, krista@oliverfinley.com, or put it on the app, on the Oliver Finley app. Okay, so now we're going to start with the subcutaneous layer, the deepest layer. It's also known as the hypodermis or superficial fascia. It is comprised of loose connective tissue or subcutaneous tissue, also known as adipose tissue. And you can see here it's 80% fat, which is adipose cells. This tissue creates a protective cushion, and it gives contour and smoothness to our body, and it's also a great source of energy for our body. Vessels, nerves, and fibers, adipose cells, and fibroblasts are some of the components that are found in the hypodermis. Now, unfortunately, as you age, this layer decreases. That's what makes people have those in their 70s. Their cheekbones look more bony. The back of their hands look more bony due to the loss of that subcutaneous fat. So clients with a really thick cutaneous layer, they may have an underlying hormonal disorder, and that will deserve further exploration when you guys perform your skincare consultation. Fat storage in our body, it's also influenced by hormones, so where you store your adipose. And then also it's reflected your hormones through acne breakouts. That is like on the adrenal glands sitting right on top of your kidneys. They're little glands about the size of a walnut, and they release a bunch of different androgens, and that lands on the cells of your sebaceous glands. They contain a lot of receptor sites that are androgen receptors, and then that stimulates that cell to have a sudden surge of sebum, and then that causes acne breakouts. Also, hair growth is influenced by the hormones and excessive oiliness or dryness. Okay, so we're going to go into the dermis. Your dermis is also called derma, corneum, or it's also called the cutis or true skin layer. It's got a bunch of different names for the same thing. It is the support layer of connective tissue right above the hypodermis. So here again is your dermis. Your dermis is 25 times thicker than your epidermis, and you can see that in this photo. Look how large it is compared to your epidermis. Okay, so your dermis primarily comprises connective tissues, which are collagen protein and elastin fibers. Now, your dermis supplies your skin with oxygen and nutrients through this network of the blood vessels and the lymphatic channels in there. Okay, so the first layer right above the hypodermis is the reticular layer, and that's this layer. It's a dense, deep layer of your dermis. It is comprised mainly of collagen and elastin. Now, when you damage these fibers, it causes primarily sagging of your skin, rhytids, and intrinsic aging, loss of elasticity in the skin. Did you know that your stretch marks are actually damage to your elastin fibers. Collagen and elastin are constantly being broken down by the UV rays. And so the UV rays, also smoking and pollution from factories and other environmental influences that do break down our collagen and elastin. The UV rays, the UVA goes all the way down here into your dermis. The B stops at the lower epidermis. So that's why they say A for aging. And then here is a comparison of older skin and younger skin. Here, your younger skin, the collagen, it's kind of these white lines. Collagen is in really good shape. You can see the elastin in there. The little green dots, those little round spheres, those are hyaluronic acid. Now, when you look at the older skin, see how the collagen is all broken apart, the elastin's in bad shape, and there's not as much hyaluronic acid in there. So with the aging process too, our hair turns gray, and that is due to the melanocytes. And you find the melanocytes right here in the hair papilla, the dermal hair papilla. And you can see there's little melanocytes, and they're what gives your hair its color. So the papillary layer is the next layer up, and I drew a line here to show you the papillary layer. It's just this little small layer right there. And your papillary layer connects the dermis to the epidermis. And it does have these little membranes or ridges and grooves that attach it. Right here you can see all these. The top of these are called reed pegs. Anyway, the papillary is attached by all these looped capillaries. So when I think of papillary layer, I just think of it this way. I say papillary. Papillary layer is where the looped capillaries are. And that has been on some of the state board exams, so you do want to remember that, where the looped capillaries are. And these looped capillaries, what they do is they nourish your epidermis, and then also in that layer is where the tactile nerve receptors are. Do you remember when we were talking about the Merkel cells and the Meissner's corpuscles? Here you can see there's a little Merkel cell, and that is where those live, is in that layer. Also, let me get this off of there. So also those are the touch and the pressure receptors. You want to note that the papillae in the hair follicle, that's that little cone-shaped structure that I showed you right here, that cone-shaped structure. That is called hair papillae, and those are at the bottom of the hair follicle. Blood supply, so you can see the blood, well, not in this one, but blood comes up in here, and it nourishes your hair through that. Also, the blood supply in the skin, right here from these capillaries, that is what nourishes those cells right above in the stratum germinativum. Okay, so it's through those looped capillaries. I do have a better photo of that right here. You can see those looped capillaries right up in here. See how they've got the little loops? Okay, so the papillary layer, it is comprised of 10 to 20% of your dermis. And you could see that again in this one when I drew this line. It's only about 10 to 20%. So the reticular is the bottom one, the papillary is the top layer. Okay, Collagen and elastin in that layer, it's a lot more loose and it's more widely spaced than it is in the reticular layer. So I just remember this way: papillary, capillary, reticular is particular because collagen and elastin mainly reside there. It's just how I remember it. Did you know that collagen is the most abundant protein in our body? And collagen, it is a protein substance of complex fibers, and it gives our skin its strength, and it's necessary for wound healing. It is produced by the fibroblast cells. So here we have the picture of the fibroblast cells, and you find them here in the dermis. Elastin, that's a fibrous protein, and it forms elastic tissue, and it gives our skins its elasticity. Now, found in your dermis, there is this substance called glycosaminoglycans. They're really large protein molecules, and they're water-binding substances, and we find them in between the fibers of the dermis. We call them GAGs for short. They are a polysaccharide, meaning they're a protein bound to a sugar complex. Saccharide is sugar. Glycosaminoglycans, they work to maintain and support our collagen and elastin, and they do retain moisture in our skin. Now, they interact with copper peptides in a system for cellular repair. The healthy fluid intake, that's really important to keep those glycosaminoglycans or GAGs functioning properly. Beneficial hydrating fluids like hyaluronic acid, that is part of our dermal substance. Hyaluronic acid is actually a GAG, a glycosaminoglycan. Remember, hyaluronic acid can hold 1,000 times its molecular weight in moisture. Ingredients that do duplicate these natural intercellular fluids, those are really important in our aesthetics and our skincare products. So collagenase and elastase, those are enzymes, and I put the word ace up here, showing that anytime you see a word ending in ace, you know means enzyme. So I'm going to erase this. Okay, so collagenase and elastase, those are the enzymes that help protect our collagen and our elastin. But however, when you get excessive levels of produced due to a response of the UV radiation and other damage, then that causes dermal breakdown and hyperpigmentation, rhytids, and premature aging. So your blood in your lymph vessels and capillaries and follicles, sebaceous glands, sudoriferous glands, and sensory nerve receptors, and the erector pili muscle, they're all found here in the dermis, and you can see all of that in here. Okay, lymph vessels, those remove waste products, bacteria, and excessive fluids from our skin. And fibroblasts, those are the cell stimulators. Remember these guys? Okay, they're the cell stimulators. Lymphocytes, which are white blood cells, they fight infection. Langerhans cells or guard cells. Mast cells, those are the cells that they release histamine and prostaglandin 2s, and they're involved in allergic reactions. What they do is they actually vasodilate, so the white army, which is your lymphocytes and your leukocytes, can come in and fight off the infection. So your leukocytes are white blood cells, and you find all these in the dermis. Other components, they give tautness and firmness to our skin by interacting with elastin and hyaluronic acid. Hormones like epidermal growth factor and fibroblast growth factors, they stimulate those fibroblasts and cells and proteins and also DNA synthesis. Now in your dermis, there's a fluid called extracellular matrix, and it is composed of collagen and other proteins and the GAGs, the glycosaminoglycans, also ground substance. These intercellular substances, they do comprise fluids with other components to maintain balance. They do provide dermal support, and they assist in cell metabolism, growth, and migration. Okay, so now we're going to move up to the dermal epidermal junction. So the dermal epidermal junction, that connects your dermis to your epidermis. And this junction consists of layers of connective collagen tissue with a lot of small pockets and holes. You could see that in here, all the little small pockets and holes. Okay, so it is collagen is the fibrils from your dermis, and they're embedded into these layers to provide strength and adhesion. Keratin filaments on the epidermal side, they also ensure strength and adhesion to that junction. Now, as an esthetician, our scope of practice is only the epidermis. You cannot go below the dermal epidermal junction. Okay, if you do, then you're into the dermis. So you would be out of your scope of practice. We're going to talk now about the epidermis. Our epidermis is the outermost layer of our skin. You can see it here in this photo. This is all the epidermis. And again, remember this was the dermis 25 times thicker than the epidermis. Your epidermis is made up of epithelial tissue that covers our body. It is a very thin protective covering with a lot of nerve endings. Now your epidermis is composed of 5 layers called strata, or singular we call them stratum. And I'm going to grab this here to show you that. So in this one, you can see the different strata or stratum layers. Okay, so we're going to start at the bottom in the red here. This is the stratum germinativum, or the growth layer. It is the bottom layer, and those are called basal cells too. Then we move up to the stratum spinosum. It's called the spiny cells, and the reason they call them the spiny cells is because here I'm going to draw a circle to make my life easier, but this is a keratinocyte with the DNA in here. And what happens is those cells start to grow little appendages, spiky appendages, and they become desmosomes that hold the cells together. So that is why they call it the spiny cells, because of those little appendages that grow off of there. And then we go into the granulosum. It's this green layer, and you can see how it's grainy. The cells are filled with lipids and they become grainy. And then of course the lucidum, and then the stratum corneum. The stratum lucidum, the reason it's called that is because those cells are clear and lucid, and they're present only where the skin is thick, on the soles of the feet and the palms of the hands. And then your stratum corneum, another name for this is the horny cell layer. And then in your book, you can see all the different layers of the skin. There is a photo in there that you can take a look at. So understanding how our skin cell layers function, that's really important when we're choosing our ingredients and performing our treatments. So our scope of practice, remember, is the epidermis, not the dermis, unless you are working under direct supervision of a physician, or maybe you're a licensed medical practitioner like a nurse practitioner or a physician or a PA. So now we're going to talk about the keratinocytes. So keratinocytes, they are composed of keratin. Mainly 95% of your cells are keratinocyte. Now the other 5% would be like your melanocytes, your Merkel cells, and your Langerhans cells. Okay, that makes up the other 5%. Okay, surrounding your cells in your epidermis are these lipids, and they protect our cells from water loss and dehydration. So keratin, that's a fibrous protein, and it provides resiliency and protection. We find keratin in all layers of our epidermis. Hard keratin is found in our hair and nails. Your skin is soft keratin. Now, the keratinocytes, they have a lot of different functions, and they go through changes as they move up to the top layers of the stratum corneum. So for one, I would just want to show you, here they're columnar cells, then all of a sudden they start to become cuboidal cells, and then up here they're called stratified squamous cells up here in the corneum. Okay, so they do go through changes as they go through that. Now, down in this layer, right here where the melanocyte lives, that is the stratum germinativum. And these cells here are mother cells, and they divide in the basal layer. And the mother cells divide and form what we call two new daughter cells. So these daughter cells, they start their journey. They move up through the layers before they become hardened corneocytes on the stratum corneum. Keratinocytes and other cells, they do protect our epidermis. The other cells are, like I told you, the melanocytes, your immune cells like your Langerhans, which is this star-shaped immune cell right here. And then you have the Merkel cells, which are your nerve receptors, and other things in there, but those are the main ones. The stratum germinativum, this is the very bottom of your epidermis, so it's this red layer, and it is also known as the basal cell layer. It's located just above your dermis, and it is just a single layer of basal cells, and they lay on the basement membrane. Now in this active layer, that's where those stem cells, it's very highly mitotic, so those stem cells, they're always undergoing cell division, mitosis, to replenish the skin cells that are regularly shed from the surface. Now your stem cells are, again, these red ones, they're basically mother cells. And again, I'm saying this, repeating it, they do divide into form two daughter cells. Some of these stem cells, daughter cells, they always remain what we call undifferentiated, and they keep on dividing for constant self-renewal over a lifetime. They either remain stem cells or they become programmed to become something else, such as a keratinocyte. Now in your body, some of those daughter cells, they go on to become skin cells. Other cells, they become glands, follicles, tissues, or organs. Those daughter cells that are not able to divide anymore, they have the capacity to become programmed to end up as one specific type of cell. And this is known as terminal differentiation. So it's the end, terminal. So those cells, like keratinocytes, they begin their journey of terminal differentiation as they migrate to the surface, and eventually they become very strong and protective. So did you know that the stratum germinativum, the basal cell layer, is where everything starts or germinates? That's how it got its name. And also basal cell carcinoma is from that layer too. Now the cells in the basal layer, they produce necessary lipids that form cell membranes, and they hold the cells together. Remember the Merkel cells, those sensory cells, those are the touch receptors, and they're located in the basal layer. The stratum germinativum also has those melanocytes, And those are the cells, remember, that produce the pigment granules in the basal layer. About 5 to 10% of your basal cells are melanocytes. So when you look at that layer, okay, so it's kind of like this. It's a wavy layer. And when you look at that layer, every 7th to 10th cell will be a melanocyte, and all the rest of these are going to be basal cells. Okay, so melanocytes, remember, those are the pigment-carrying granules that have little melanosomes, the little balls that are filled with melanin, and that determines our skin, eye, and our hair color. Okay, so the stratum spinosum, the next layer up, it is the largest layer. It's this, whoops, let me get this right. It is the largest layer right here, okay? And the stratum spinosum in this layer, it's called the spiny layer, and I told you why, because of the little prickly appendages that they become desmosomes. And they assist in strengthening and holding those cells together. So desmosomes, they're a keratin filament, and the protein bonds that create the junctions between our cells. And so I'll kind of show you how that works. So when you look at, and I'm going to draw circles again for cells to make it easier. So I'll draw 4 of them. So you have the little desmosomes between the cells, and they hold those cells together, and they strengthen your epidermis, and they also assist in intercellular communication too. So I always think of, like, you know, maybe when you were a kid, you played the telephone where you took a cup and you had a string to the other one, and so you could talk through the cups on, I don't know, on the string. Anyway, but that's how, when I was a kid, we used to do that. And so that reminds me of the desmosomes and the intercellular communication. Also found in this layer, again, is the Langerhans cell, the star-shaped immune cell right there. And those are the ones that protect our body from infection by identifying foreign material antigens. Well, these immune cells, they help destroy the foreign invaders. Keratinocytes and melanocytes, they work together here to form an even placement of pigment granules. Okay, so you have lamellar granules. I don't know why I couldn't say that. Those are the cells that contain lipids to maintain the barrier function. And the spinosum, again, like I said, this is the spinosum. It is the largest layer right there. And I'll show you here as well. So this is the spinosum, this layer. It's the largest. And the reason it's so large is because of the hills and valleys. Okay. So the next layer up is the stratum granulosum. Okay, and that one on here is this green layer. So it's a grainy layer. It is composed of cells that resemble granules, and they're filled with keratin. Now, the production of keratin and intercellular lipids also take place here. You want to remember that because I have seen in the past that question has been on boards test. So it'll say what layer of the skin is the production of lipids. So you'll want to know that. In this layer, there's enzymes in there, and they dissolve these desmosomes. So these enzymes come in and dissolve the desmosomes. Okay, and that's what holds our skin cells together. Well, as these cells become keratinized, they move up to the surface, and then they replace the cells shed from the stratum corneum. Also, another fact, from the stratum granulosum above, all those cells, they no longer contain a nucleus. They're too far away from the blood supply, and they're pretty much just dead cells. The nucleus defragments, and so those cells are dead. Anyway, so we have natural moisturizing factors such as triglycerides, ceramides, waxes, fatty acids, and other intercellular lipids are made here, and then they're excreted from the cells to form components of our skin's waterproofing barrier function of the top layer. Now, these water-soluble compounds, they're referred to as natural moisturizing factors. And they hydrate the lipid layers surrounding our cells, they absorb water, and they also prevent water loss. Okay, so the next layer up is the stratum lucidum. And it got its name again because when you're looking at those cells, and I'm going to show you in this one as well, it's this clear layer right here. Okay, so because those cells are lucid or transparent, and they allow light to pass through. Now this layer is the thickest on the palms of your hands and the soles of your feet. So the keratinocytes in this layer, like I said, they're filled with a clear keratin. And the cells here also release lipids, forming bilayers of oil and water. The thicker skin on your palms and the soles, they are composed of epidermal ridges that provide a better grip for us while we're walking or using our hands. And it is actually this layer that forms our unique fingerprints and footprints. So you want to remember that as well. Okay, so the stratum corneum, the very outer layer. It's kind of hard to see on this one, but there's the stratum corneum. I will show it to you on this one. That is the corneum. And then here, hopefully you can see it even better. This is the stratum corneum. Okay, so the stratum corneum is also known as the horny layer, and it's the top outermost layer of our epidermis. It's the one that we work on. The stratum corneum, it's very thin, but yet it's waterproof and it's permeable. And it does regenerate itself, and it detoxifies our body, and it responds to stimuli. So the keratinocytes on the surface, they've hardened into what we call corneocytes. That's why it's called corneum. They're very waterproof, protective cells. These dead protein cells, they've dried out and they lack a nuclei. They don't have a nucleus. And this layer is referred to as the horny layer, and that's due to the scale-like cells. Keratinocytes are constantly being shed from our skin. We call this process desquamation. And these cells are being replaced by new cells coming up to the surface from the lower stratums. Now this process of desquamation and replacement, we call that cell turnover. Now the average adult cell turnover rate is about 28 days, depending on your age, your lifestyle, and your health. So the cell turnover rate, it does slow down with our age. And unfortunately, as you get older, it takes such a long time for those cells to reach the surface. And they start in the stratum germinativum, and then they make their way to the surface. So babies, their cell turnover cycle is only 14 days. So from here, you can see from here to the surface takes about 14 days. In your teens, those cells are replaced every 3 to 4 weeks. By the time you're 50, unfortunately, your cell turnover has slowed down to about 42 to 84 days. Understanding the process of cell turnover, that's what helps you make better decisions about how to treat aging skin. So I'm going to erase this. So remember, I want you to remember babies 14 days and adults 28 days. You want to remember those numbers. And then, of course, 50 years and older, 42 to 84 days. Okay, cells in oil, they combine to form what we call a protective barrier layer on the stratum corneum. The lamellar granules, those are secreted from keratinocytes, and they result in the formation of an impermeable lipid-containing membrane that serves as a water barrier, and it is required for correct skin barrier function. These bodies are released. They release little components, and they're required for skin shedding, desquamation in the stratum corneum. This is what we call the acid mantle. Remember our acid mantle? It's made up of sebum and sweat. And so these little bodies, again, they release those components that are required for skin shedding, desquamation in the stratum corneum. And the stratum corneum cells here, they are surrounded by these little bilayers of oil and water. And lipids in our cell membrane, like phospholipids, because that's what your cell membranes are made up of, and essential fatty acids, they do determine the health of this protective barrier. So to clarify, a bilayer, it's a thin polar membrane. It's made up of two layers of lipid molecules. So I'll kind of show you a little picture of it. Here you have a phospholipid head with two fatty acid tails. Again, here's the bilayer. You have another phospholipid head with the fatty acid tails. And that is what makes up the cell membrane. So that's why they got the name phospholipids, because of the phosphate group on there. Anyway, it's a bilayer. It's a very thin polar membrane made up of those two layers of lipid molecules. Your cell membranes, those are almost all of your living organisms, and a lot of viruses have them, and bacteria, they have the lipid membrane. So those membranes surround the cell nucleus and other subcellular structures. So in general, the stratum corneum, it's made up of 15 to 20 cells, layers of cells. So there's about 15 to 20 layers of cells. Remember, the basal layer, only one layer thick. So the stratum corneum, again, its thickness is 0.01 to 0.04 millimeters. And the keratinocytes on the surface of our skin, they're really flat. They're plate-like and scaly, so we call them squamous keratinized cells. And there's a lot of different terms used to describe those same cells, but you just want to remember that these surface cells are both flat and hardened. They're squamous and cornified. Now, our skin color. Remember the melanocytes? Well, melanin, melanocytes, and melanosomes, those are some terms that you need to know. Melanin, that is the pigment that protects us from the sun. Every person has the same number of melanocytes. But both internal and external factors do affect the melanin activation and the production. So there are differences in our genetic skin color due to the amount of melanin that's activated in our skin and the way it's distributed. Remember, individuals with darker skin and melanin, they have more active melanocytes. And this is an example of internal factors. External factors would be the production of sun exposure. Okay, so the melanin production is stimulated by the sun, and then that stimulates that melanocyte. And the melanocyte cells, they have to do their job to protect their keratinocytes. Okay, so one melanocyte is responsible for about 20 or 30 keratinocytes through its dendrites. So if you're looking here, let me see. If you're looking here at the layers of the skin, okay, melanocyte lives here. And he's responsible for about 30, and I'm not going to draw 30, but about 30 keratinocytes, just one melanocyte. Okay, so, and then it makes, again, remember those little spheres called melanosomes. And then those melanosomes traveled up the dendrite arms in releasing the melanin into those into the keratinocytes. And here's my paper I was looking for. So this is your melanocyte, and then remember these melanosomes are carried up through the dendrite arms. So they go up through here and they deposit these little melanosomes into these keratinocytes to protect those cells. So as if you're exposed to the sun, you notice you get a suntan, and that is due to the activation of the melanocyte and the concentration of those melanosomes into those keratinocytes. So, tyrosinase. Now, this melanocyte here, it releases an enzyme from the rough endoplasmic reticulum. So it releases that enzyme called tyrosinase. Remember, the word ACE means enzyme. Okay, so these are the enzymes that stimulate the melanocyte and that helps produce the melanin. And it's estimated that there's over 1,000 melanocytes per square millimeter, which is 1/8 of an inch of our skin. And melanocytes are those cells that produce those pigment granules called melanosomes. And melanocytes are stimulated to produce those melanosomes by the enzyme tyrosinase. So melanosomes, here's some things you want to focus on with the melanin. Melanocytes, I'm going to write this term down for you. Site means cell. Okay, so remember, ACE means enzyme, site means cell. And I'm going to erase this. And some means sphere. Okay, so there's some terms there that I want you to remember. So melanocytes are the cells that produce the pigment granules called melanosomes. Okay, and then this is the melanocyte cell, and then of course again the melanosomes. Melanocytes are stimulated to produce melanosomes by that enzyme called tyrosinase. And melanosomes, they carry and produce the protein called melanin. So they're filled with melanin. And then melanin is transferred to the cells from the melanosomes through those dendritic branches. Now your body produces different types of melanin. And the first one we're going to talk about is pheomelanin. Pheomelanin is red to yellow in color, and then eumelanin is dark brown to black. So people with really light colored skin, say like me, I produce more pheomelanin, while people of a Fitzpatrick 6 would produce mostly eumelanin. So individuals with really fair skin, they have, again, remember when I was telling you earlier, we have about 20 melanosomes per keratinocyte right above the nucleus that houses the DNA, okay? And that's what protects mutation of the DNA. And then people with really dark skin, they have about 200 melanosomes per keratinocyte. Now, we do use products that suppress that melanin production. What they do is they interrupt the biochemical process, and we call those brightening agents. A lot of people call them tyrosinase inhibitors. Well, these products are designed to reduce hyperpigmentation. Pigmentation disorders, we do talk about those more in the chapter on disorders and diseases. So we'll talk about hyperpigmentation, chloasma, melasma, and things like that. Products and treatments for hyperpigmentation, we talk more about those in the chapter on skincare products and chemistry. So we'll talk more about those in those chapters. So let's do a little recap here. Remember the subcutaneous layer of the skin. It's also called the hypodermis, and it is the lowest layer of the skin, and it's mainly comprised of loose connective tissue. Remember, 80% of that is fat. It does create a protective cushion. It gives us contour and smoothness to our body, and it's a source of stored energy. Okay, so then we're going to talk about the dermis. Your dermis, remember, has two layers. I'm going to show you this again. Two layers, the reticular and the papillary layer. Fibroblasts and immune cells are found in this layer. The reticular layer, okay, it is mainly collagen and elastin reside there. You'll find glands, blood vessels, lymph vessels, nerve endings, and intercellular fluids like hyaluronic acid, your gags, and stuff found there. Now, the papillary rhymes with capillary. That is where those looped capillaries, those blood vessels, are living. Touch receptors, remember the Merkel cells, the Meissner cells, they all live there. And dermal papilla, which are these right here. Okay, and then the epidermis, remember, is composed of 5 layers, and that is we'll start at the bottom. We'll go stratum germinativum, stratum spinosum, stratum granulosum, stratum spinosum, and then of course we go to the stratum corneum. So let's look again at the stratum germinativum. Remember, that's that single layer of cells, highly mitotic. It's where cell mitosis constantly happening. The stem cells live there, the Merkel cells, the keratinocytes, the melanocytes, and lipids are produced here as well. Stratum spinosum, the next layer up, this is the largest layer. Cell activity happens, the cells change here. Desmosomes are created. Remember, they're the things that hold the cells together. Langerhans cells live here. They're your guard cell or immune cells. And melanosomes, the pigment distribution is in here too. Those little melanosomes go into the keratinocytes. The next layer up is the stratum granulosum, this green layer again. That's where the production of keratin granules in the cells are, additional lipid production, excretion, and desmosomes. They are dissolved by enzymes in there. Okay, so the stratum lucidum, the next layer right here, that is where the clear cells live. They're the thickest on the palms and the soles of the feet. And then the very outer layer, the stratum corneum, that's where the hardened corneocytes live. They're also referred to as flattened squamous cells. melanin, basal or the barrier layer, and acid mantle and desquamation is all there too. Okay, so there's a little activity that we're going to look at next. It says to become more familiar with the layers of the skin. This is where you're going to use an unlabeled or a blank skin chart to draw and label all the parts of the skin. Again, if you didn't do the model and you did this, then just do this or use this instead. So use different colors though to represent the different layers and each component in the skin. What you could do if you want, you could color each layer, say like this is different colors here. And then compare the different layers. And as you guys are doing these, I need you to write out what's happening in each of these layers. Guys, because unfortunately on your state board exam, it's going to ask you questions of each of these layers. Now, I do have a way to remember the layers of the skin. It's something years ago, some students that I had and I come up with this little acronym. And we'll start from the outer part, and it's cool ladies get super grades. That is all the epidermis. Past regular school. All right, so I'll write that down. Cool ladies get super grades. Past regular school. If that helps you, hopefully, here I'll move that so you can see. Hopefully that helps you. But what it is the stratum corneum, stratum lucidum, stratum granulosum, stratum spinosum, stratum germinativum, or the basal layer. Then we go into the dermis here. This is dermis. The papillary rhymes with capillary. Reticular is particular because collagen and elastin reside there. And then S, school for subcutaneous layer. So those are all the layers of the epidermis and the dermis and the hypodermis. So the next thing that you're going to have to do is there's a little check-in with some questions. Again, just like the other section, I need you guys to send these to me. Name the 2 components of your dermis, and then name the 5 layers of your epidermis, and then what are the keratinocytes, and then clarify the process of skin melanization, and then how does your skin repair itself. So I need you to send these answers to these to me, either email or again on the Oliver Finley app. And then once we're done with this section of the reading, then I need you guys to go into the discussion of the skin layers. That again is where you draw all the labels and parts of the skin. You can go online and download a little drawing of the skin and then go ahead and label those if you want. If you already drew the layers of the skin, just skip this part. And then there's a little do section, and it is where you have to, it's called the layers of the skin, and it is a multiple choice questions on there that you'll need to answer. Also, another chapter 3 do, it's the layers of the skin labeling, and you'll match the term to the different layers of the skin. And then of course there's the model case study, that's underneath that. You do need to do that as well. There are 29 questions on that. And so that will be the end of this section. So go ahead and work on all this, and I'll see you in the next section.